I'm Seb Thorpe. I'll be your host for this afternoon's event. Thank you all very much for taking the time to join us. We understand that you've probably had to juggle quite a few commitments within and outside of work, and for many after a long working day. So we really do appreciate you being here with us. And I'm pleased to welcome you to this afternoon's session, Preparing Children with SEND for Smooth Transitions. And transitions, as we know, are so important to the work that we do. And today we'll explore them from the perspective of supporting and preparing children with SEND to hopefully provide you with some new ideas and practical strategies to take back into your settings. In terms of this afternoon's events, we have a fantastic selection of speakers lined up. Firstly, we have Harjit Athwal, Deputy Director for Early Years at the Department for Education, who will provide a short update on what the Best Start in Life strategy means for Early Years SEND. And following that, we have Meggie Fisher, Head of Quality at Dingley's Promise, who will discuss the vital task of preparing children with SEND for smooth transitions. And finally, Wendy Ratcliff, Principal Officer for Early Education Policy at Ofsted, will talk about Ofsted's renewed approach to the Education Inspection Framework. A question and answer session will be conducted directly after each of the speakers have completed their presentations, allowing you to ask them questions before we move on to the next speaker, which again will be followed by another Q&A session. And the Q&A function can be accessed at the top of your screens. You've got a little speech bubble with a question mark, Q&A beneath. Just click on there and leave any questions that you may have. We are now ready to introduce Harjit Athwal from the Department for Education. Over to you, Harjit.
Brilliant. Thank you, Seb. As Seb said, my name is Harjit Athwal and I'm one of the Deputy Directors in the Department for Education working on early years. It's really lovely to be here today. I think this is my first foundation years event despite working in early years for 5 years. So that says something, doesn't it? And it is really lovely to be here. And I will just be providing kind of a bit of a short overview of the government's vision to giving every child the best start in life and how we'll support this, how we're going to be supporting children with SEND. So, next slide, please. As you may be aware, the department published the Giving Every Child the Best Start in Life strategy in July of this year. This document sets out the government's approach in improving child development and meeting the ambition that 75% of 5-year-olds in England will achieve a good level of development by 2028. That 75% target was included in the Prime Minister's plan for change published towards the end of last year. So that gives a sense of kind of how much of a priority this is for the government. We know that high quality early education and care can make a significant difference to children's outcomes in the short and longer term. And there's lots of evidence that supports this, particularly for the most disadvantaged children. So building on what we have learned from the Early Years Recovery Programme over the last few years, we've continued to provide a range of high quality, evidence-based support for early years educators and leaders to improve outcomes for those children in their care. This has included further development of the Early Years Child Development Training, continuation of our Special Educational Needs Coordinators SENCO training programme, as well as the publication of online SEND guidance and resources. We've also continued to invest in programmes to continue to support early language by the Nuffield Early Language Intervention and Maths Champions, as well as extending funding for our 18 existing Stronger Practice Hubs to support early years educators to improve quality in EY settings. Moving on to children with SEND in particular, the Best Start in Life strategy has several elements which will support SEND, as it will mean a stronger focus on early intervention, inclusive access to early education and more tailored family support. The government has committed to increasing access to settings by investing in inclusion and early intervention, expanding the number of family hubs and having SEND trained professionals within those hubs, and improving funding streams to help early year settings provide the right resources for children with SEND. In addition, the strategy supports smoother transitions between early year settings and schools to ensure children with SEND are supported. We know how difficult that transition is for children, parents and settings, so it's important to get that right. So what does this actually mean in practice? So following the publication of the strategy, we're working to address some of the concerns we've heard raised on workforce funding and wider needs. We're doing this by working with early years educators to make inclusive practice standard practice so that all children are included and are able to learn and grow. This includes funding and looking at the role of SENCOs and how best to embed inclusive practice across all early years teaching and qualifications. We'll be increasing the funding available to providers to support children with SEND. We'll also be making improvements to the way funding is allocated as part of the wider reforms to the SEND system. We believe that improved funding will provide additional resources for providers to better support inclusion and early intervention to prevent the escalation of needs. We'll also be funding the Best Start family hubs in every local authority to help support children with additional needs. They will have specially trained professionals within hubs to identify children with SEND and make links with earlier settings and health services to provide the support that those children may need. This is all part of wider plans to support children and young people with SEND across education. So I've spoken a bit about the particular early years elements, but let me place that within the wider context. Reforms to the SEND system are some of the most crucial this government will deliver, and that's why it's so essential that we take the time to listen and get it right. To help us deliver the most effective set of reforms we can, the department has taken the decision to have a further period of co-creation, testing our proposals with the people who matter most in this reform, the families, alongside teachers and other experts. We'll bring forward a full schools white paper early in the new year, underpinned by our belief that high standards and inclusion are two sides of the same coin. Through this period of co-creation, we'll be engaging parents, educators, experts and representative organisations to build on the constructive dialogue we've already undertaken. The work that I've outlined for early years is a key element of this, and we'll come back in the future with further information on the approach. Thank you. We've got a few minutes for particular questions on this section. I think Lisa Tom from our earlier SEND team is also here, so I'll open it up to any questions.
No, none have come in yet, Harjit, but thank you so much for spending the time there to explain that to us. And as you say, we've got Lisa Tom with us as well. So if any questions do come through in the meantime, be sure to pass those over to you. And just to clarify, I did touch upon it earlier when I was rushing through the intro. Any questions that for any of our speakers today that we're unable to answer, we will collect up all of the questions, disseminate to speakers, and publish all responses on the Foundation Years website as a follow-up resource. So please don't be disheartened, anyone, if questions are unanswered today. We will get around to answering them and publishing them onto our website as well. So Harjit, I'm still not seeing any coming through yet. So if we do receive any, we can pass them over to you and Lisa. But thank you so much from hearing all about the Best Start in Life policy and how that will affect SEND in early years moving forward. So if there's still no more questions coming through, I think we can move on to hear from Meggie Fisher, Head of Quality at Dingley's Promise, who will share with us some ways in which we can support children with SEND make smooth transitions. Thank you, Harjit.
Hello, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Yeah, I'm Meggie Fisher from Dingley's Promise. So for those of you who don't know who Dingley's Promise are or haven't come across us yet, just a very quick introduction. So we are a charity that delivers specialist nursery provision for children with SEND across England. We now have 10 centres across England, and we work really closely with the children, the families and other mainstream providers to help sure we're getting the right place for the right children. We've been around for over 40 years now, and we've supported thousands of children and family in that time. And we are particularly passionate about giving children that right transition into the right place. So whilst historically about 35% of our children would transition from us back into a mainstream provider, in recent years we're seeing 70% of our children transitioning back into a mainstream nursery or into mainstream school. So we know how important it is to get that transition process right. We have lots of aspects to Dingley's Promise. We work across the UK with different local authorities. We have a training platform with a variety of inclusion training available. We provide support and advice to people like the DfE when we're asked to. And our wonderful CEO, Catherine, is often lobbying for change nationally and making sure that those early years SEND children's voices are being heard. So when we think about transition to SEND, we often start with what do we think some of the common barriers are to good transitions. We know that transitions can raise mixed feelings in settings. It's often the summer term, everyone's tired, you might be hot, bothered, who knows what the weather's doing. You've usually got your graduation parties or your leavers celebrations, parents' evenings that you're preparing for, assessments you've got to complete before the end of term. Also, while you're trying to make sure you're still giving children a really positive transition experience into their new school. So when you think about your setting and where you are, what would you deem a barrier? Often we hear things like a lack of strategic approach or value placed on the early years. Joint working can often be really challenging. Parents might not know what to expect or what the process involves, so how they influence that process, they're not sure. And we often see that actually a lack of reflection or a lack of way to measure actually what a successful transition looks like really doesn't exist. So no one really knows how effective they are. We often hear that feedback that transition plans are made last minute or potentially not at all. Partnership between settings and schools is challenging, and we need to spend some time thinking about actually how can we really improve that transition process. So when we start planning for effective transitions, one thing we need to make sure we're doing is giving everyone a voice. It's vital that the child is kept at the centre of all the decisions that we make. This ensures that the transitions are purposeful and that all experiences are meaningful for that individual child. Communication is key, as is understanding that everyone has a point of view. It's important to have honest conversations with our families and to know what provision is available in your area. With the right support, children can thrive in mainstream, and with specialist school places often in short supply, it's vital that we all work together to create inclusive environments, and part of that really does include inclusive transition processes. When we take a celebratory approach to children's learning and development, we can make education and transitions a really positive experience for families, and we can share what children can do and how they will continue to achieve in their next setting. You can use tools such as the one-page profile or support and achievement play plans, which are set out in the SEND assessment guidance. These can be used to create a really clear picture of the key information you want to gather, and ensures that this can be shared easily to give the child the best opportunity to thrive in a setting that is ready and prepared to meet their needs. At Dingley's Promise, we really like to start our planning for transitions as early as possible. We know that taking time with these processes has a really positive impact for the children. So throughout your child's preschool year, each term there are different things that you can be doing to help ensure those transitions are really positive. So as early as the autumn term, you can start discussing transitions with families, encouraging them to visit both the mainstream and the specialist school providers in your area so that they can be prepared. Ensuring that families don't miss their school deadline is also key. One challenge that we often come across is where families are unsure about what the right place for their child to go is, or they want to hold out and they feel a specialist school is the right place. They get so caught up in the thinking that they miss the deadlines, and then their options become more limited because they haven't made that deadline for school applications. So it's really key that you gentle reminders to make sure our parents stay on track with the timelines. There are lots of different ways that you can actively support children with SEND with these transition processes. I think it's very common that lots of nurseries will provide uniforms and bags and things for children to dress up in throughout the year. For our children with SEND, I think one of the most common sort of adaptations we often see is that challenge around wearing uniform. So being able to provide this in your setting, you are providing that first opportunity to get exposure. If you have different types of school shoes, you can help children try different types of straps, different types of shoe. If you can keep track of this information, share with parents what they gravitate towards, you can help really make that difference between whether they need that total adjustment of a no uniform when they go to school, or whether there are elements of the uniform that they are happy and settled with. Things like noticing whether they prefer the buttons on a cardigan or a pullover jumper or a shirt or a polo neck. Taking note and giving them the opportunity to explore it in a safe place will help make it much smoother for the child when it comes to going to school. Stories and videos about their new setting can be easily implemented throughout the day. Hopefully, lots of schools now have online videos giving a tour of what's going on. And if you've got children who are going to find this change quite challenging, make sure once you know where they're going, you speak to the school, you get photos of those key people that are going to be involved, photographs of the toilets, the playgrounds, their favourite area to play in, so that you can start introducing it to them and, tell them that actually it's going to be a really positive experience and these are the great things you can enjoy. One thing that we often encourage our parents to do is walk the walk or drive the drive. That change of moving to a different place can just interrupt their daily routine and be a challenge to start with. So encouraging them to practice the route to school so that they notice if they walk past certain trees or if there are roads to cross that they need to be confident and comfortable with. Walking the walk, giving it a go really helps make that school setting feel more welcoming, more exciting, and makes the child just feel comfortable with their familiar surroundings. So when we support children with SEND, it's really important that we are making some of these reasonable adjustments and supporting families to ask the right questions. Giving the families the confidence to say when they go on school visits, what will my child's day look like in your setting? Can settling sessions be adapted for my child where it's needed? Giving the parent the confidence and some ideas of things that they can ask will really help them feel confident that the school can provide for their child. When it comes to settling sessions, things like a school might plan 3 20-minute reading sessions for children who are starting reception. It's worth asking, well, for this child, can they attend at the last 5 minutes so that they can explore the environment at their own place? They might not participate in the same way that other children will do, but it doesn't mean that they can't participate, and it doesn't mean that we can't adapt to meet their needs while they're having that transition. So it's really important to ask these questions to see what is possible to help work together to meet the needs of that child. It is really important to have regular communication throughout the year between the setting, the home and the school, all whilst considering the child's voice. Everyone will have different views, different objectives when it comes to what this transition is going to look like, but it's important to keep children at the centre of all of those decisions that we're making and ask ourselves, what does this mean to them? So hopefully through this short discussion today, you've had lots of ideas or thoughts to reflect on. It's really important to remember that, as with everything we do, you should take a one-size-fits-one approach to transitions. What works this year for this year's cohort of children may not work for next year's cohort, and what works for Billy might not work for Sally. So it's your role to be really reflective, flexible and supportive to meet the individual needs of each child. You might want to reflect on what your current transition processes look like. Do you start thinking about transitions as early as now? How do you regularly remind parents about the deadlines that are coming up for admissions? How do you have those conversations around what is the right provision and how that child can be supported and have their needs met wherever it is that they're going to go? You might want to think about what transitions look like. You might want to think what works really well for us. It's great to celebrate what works well and remind yourselves of those positives, as well as thinking about, well, what could be better? What else could we try? What could we adjust or adapt to meet the needs of different children? Think about who your local schools are. We often end up with feeder schools or schools that we have really strong links with. How can we improve those links? How can we make sure we are working together and collaborating to create successful transitions for our children with SEND? And then it's one final thought on that, is that how are you measuring those transitions? Do you check in once the child has moved on? Do you hear from the school about how that session has gone, just so that you know that actually next time that it's working really well, or we need to try something different. We do have lots of further information on our website and throughout some of our courses, so please visit our website. There's loads of free downloadable resources that you can use to help with strategies or techniques or ideas. There are videos, there's written guidance. We try to provide it in different ways. So if there's anything that you're looking for support with, our website can be a really useful place. And you can also get in touch if there's anything that you want to know, whether it's with me directly or to our info box, and the information will be shared with someone who's able to get back to you and provide what support we can, because we know that, you know, any support is always helpful for people, so you're more than welcome to get in touch. And yeah, any questions?
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Meggie. So we've now, well, the question and answer section has been open throughout. So if there are any questions for Meggie, please do feel free to put them into the Q&A function, and we can ask those questions. I've noticed that there's a few that have filtered through, Harjit and Lisa as well, potentially for you. So you can just maybe in the interest of time, and obviously the delayed start, once again, apologies for that, we can maybe mix up some of these questions. So there is one that came in relation to the Best Start family hubs. When will they be coming into place? That's probably one to send over to maybe Harjit and Lisa. Where will the family hubs be located, and how soon will they come on to stream? And the funding as well, will they be through a local authority? So a mixture of questions there in a very sort of similar kind of area. Do you want to pick those up if possible?
Yeah, I can make a stab at those. I'm not an expert on family hubs, I have to admit, but we already have some out there. The part of the Best Start in Life strategy was the commitment to expand them to all local authority areas. That's going to take a little bit of time to get to, so it's not going to happen overnight. So that is the plan. The funding for them is coming directly from the department. We're working with local authorities, we're working with health services, etc., in local areas to set those up. So there should be some coming your way if there aren't already any in your area. So keep a lookout over the next few months.
Wonderful. Thank you, Harjit. I appreciate that. And Meggie, I've seen a couple that have come through for you. Firstly, from Elliot, what advice do you have for gaining communications and transition relationships with primary schools?
It can be challenging. Everyone's really short of time. Emailing, phoning, and even going as far as just knocking on the front door. I know, you know, during the working day, finding that time to pop out and do that, but sometimes that face-to-face engagement is just what you need to really get the ball rolling. We've done things where you can, if you're hosting an information evening for parents, have you got a local school or a head teacher who might come and speak, you know, give them an opportunity to sort of speak out with other people, and it can help start getting that connection going. So yeah, persistency, I'm afraid, when it comes to building those relationships in your local area.
Thank you, Meggie. And another follow-up question from Sally. Do you need to apply for an SEN school earlier, and do you need an EHCP to apply?
Different specialist schools will have different application processes or referral processes and criteria. Typically, yes, you have to have an EHC when it comes to them, but I don't want to speak to every single school that's out there. In terms of application process, no, usually it is in the same sort of timeline as applying for mainstream school, but I would always make sure that your families are having those conversations out in the open, just speaking to people, getting the ball rolling. Earlier will not necessarily guarantee them a space, but there's no harm in having that conversation.
Wonderful, thank you. And I've noticed another one just dropping from Imogen. How do you find a list of specialist provision in local areas? Each local authority will have a local offer, and on their local offer there should be a list of all of the specialist provision available in their area. Wonderful. And I've got another question that it's just dropped in from Bev. In relation to the SEN trained staff at family hubs, is this trained SENCOs, or will the LA area SENCOs be lifted to be based there if they aren't there already?
I don't think it will be actually either of those. I think it will be people within the setting, within the family hub trained. So it won't be existing SENCOs. It will be, or they might be working with the local authority, but I doubt that it will be the person that's already working for the local authority. So we're working through exactly who they are and how they will be trained at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you, Harjit. And I think we've got time for one final question. And thank you so much, Harjit and Meggie, for improvising and merging this Q&A section together after the late start. I do really appreciate that. And apologies if we are jumping around a little bit. I just want as many questions to be answered as possible, and to repeat, any that don't get answered, we will sweep them up post-event and get them up onto the website for you when they've been answered. So final question, would you advise parents to apply for both special schools and mainstream schools?
You're not guaranteed a specialist school place. However, if you don't apply for a mainstream school and you don't get your specialist school place, they are a little stuck as to where their child then goes. I would encourage all settings to have really honest conversations with their parents and families around the provision that's available, what that support their child will need. In our experience, some inclusion is better than no inclusion. We're not saying that children who go to a mainstream primary will stay in mainstream forever. It might be that down the line, the right place for them is to move to a specialist school. But that doesn't mean that actually for the first 2 or 3 years of primary education, that they can't thrive in a mainstream provider. So I think it's about having really open conversations with your families. Yes, if they really passionately want to go to a specialist school, I would still encourage them to make their mainstream school applications, so that if they aren't allocated that specialist place, they're not then stuck with no place for their child to go. Because we know that specialist school places are scarce. I know there's lots of specialist schools being built and increased provision in different areas, but we want to make sure that the right children go to the right places. So I would advise to do both where we can.
Wonderful. Thank you both, Harjit and Meggie, once again. I really appreciate the detailed and thoughtful answers there. And I think we are now pretty much ready to move on to our next speaker, welcoming Wendy Ratcliff from Ofsted, who will detail the education inspection framework and Ofsted's renewed approach to that. So really looking forward to hear this from Wendy. So over to you, Wendy. And yeah, any more questions, please feel free to add them throughout the presentation, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Seb, and thank you, Seb, for helping with the slides and moving those on as well. And also thank you to Harjit. Great to hear about DfE's Best Start in Life strategy and what that means for children with special educational needs and disabilities. And then from Maggie about the importance of transition to school for children with SEND. I'm pleased to be joining you this evening to share the changes we're making to inspection from November and what this means for children with SEND, because inclusion will be a focus on all inspections. As Seb says, my name's Wendy Ratcliff. I'm one of His Majesty's Inspectors, and I'm also Principal Officer for our Early Education Policy. And I think, firstly, just to say thank you to all of you from us at Ofsted for what you do for our children every day. So, moving forward, our renewed approach, what does this mean? We will put babies and children first, breaking barriers down by raising standards up, especially for the most disadvantaged and vulnerable. We will improve the way we report and the content of inspection findings to parents and carers. We will improve the look and feel of inspection for education settings and professionals with a more collaborative approach. We will maintain our focus on having care and concern for the well-being and workload of leaders and staff. And we will take context into greater account on inspection. We will make sure that inspections are consistent in their approach and continue to improve our processes for allowing inspections to be challenged. We'll also provide constructive next steps to improve the settings to improve based on conversations with leaders. And of course, we want to be different by design. We've further tailored our inspection approach to each of the education remits that we inspect and the different provision types within them. So, for example, for early years, we've worked to align regulation and inspection standards so that the renewed framework is more closely aligned to the DfE's EYFS. So let's now think about how we've strengthened our approach to inclusion, given the theme of this evening's webinar. We will put babies and children first, breaking down barriers to learning and well-being, progress and achievement by raising standards, especially for the most disadvantaged and vulnerable. Can't emphasise that enough. This is why we're introducing a separate inclusion evaluation area, and inclusion will also be a key theme across other evaluation areas. As part of this evaluation area, our inspections will look at how settings are addressing barriers to children's learning. We will always start with those that the government asks settings to focus on, whether through statutory obligations or non-statutory guidance. That is why we're focusing we've got a particular emphasis on those from socio-economically disadvantaged backgrounds and those with SEND, and those known or previously known to children's social care. We will also evaluate how well settings ensure high quality support for all children who may face other barriers to their learning and or their well-being, working with leaders to understand their context informed by data and professional dialogue. We've also revised how we describe inclusion, and we agree with the feedback that we've received that it's not for us at Ofsted to define inclusion, and we are also describing this as our approach to inclusion, which is captured in the way that we've drafted our toolkits and our inspection. So what do some of these changes mean for early years? We'll introduce toolkits. So let me explain how the toolkit works for early years. Toolkits show leaders and inspectors the evaluation areas that we'll focus on, and within them the standards we will evaluate and use to grade settings. Inspectors will apply the toolkit evaluation areas, the themes and standards, tailoring evaluation to each setting's context. And nothing in the standards set out in the toolkits should add to a setting's workload. Our toolkits are built on the requirements, the standards and the expectations already placed on you as leaders and your provision. And as I've already said, for us in early years, this is the DfE's EYFS. Inspections can then help you as settings to focus on delivering these requirements more efficiently and effectively. We don't expect you to be doing anything just for Ofsted. There is no expectation for you to do anything different or additional for us that isn't already part of your usual day-to-day business. Nor do we expect you to have completed any formal self-evaluation. However, you may wish to use the toolkit to support continuing improvement. We've carefully reflected on the evaluation areas in our consultation and how these should apply to early years. So let's have a look at some of those. So here on this slide are the evaluation areas for early years, which are specifically designed to align with the EYFS. Safeguarding standards will be given a met or a not met evaluation in early years, as in schools and other remits. Along with safeguarding, the evaluation areas for early years are inclusion, curriculum and teaching, achievement, behaviour, attitudes and establishing routines, children's welfare and well-being, leadership and governance. And in response to the feedback that we received about there being too many evaluation areas, so thank you for your feedback, we've merged developing teaching with curriculum to create a single curriculum and teaching evaluation area. Let's have a look at the toolkit in a bit more detail. In the toolkit, there is a covering page for each evaluation area, which includes a summative statement at the top of what the evaluation area considers. And this is designed to help settings and inspectors to see at a glance what the evaluation area is all about. There then follows a statement to remind us that our grading standards are based on what settings are already required to do and, as previously explained, are based on statutory duties and statutory and non-statutory guidance. The toolkit makes it clear that, as settings, you shouldn't be doing anything just for the day our inspectors come in. You shouldn't be spending a single penny or minute on anything that isn't in the best interests of your children. Following that, the toolkit sets out the most significant contributory factors that underpin our approaches to evidence gathering and grading. This is very much based on the research that underpinned our education inspection framework. So on the next slide, here we can see that we've been really clear about our renewed framework that will ensure consistency of inspection practice. We've also made sure that the toolkit is reflective of each remit and different provider types within it. In our early years toolkit, we've included an explanation of how it should be applied within different provider types. For example, in achievement, you can see here on the slide, inspectors will consider what practice looks like in a childminder or for different ages of children, including children with SEND. This helps settings see that the standards are not generic statements, but are carefully tailored to reflect the different ages of children as well as the provision type. Where relevant, this section sets out the areas that apply to different types of settings, such as out-of-school settings, as well as when we inspect where there are no children present or on roll. In short, the toolkit seeks to make it clear how we will apply each evaluation area in a setting like yours, and what you can expect inspectors to be looking at in practice. And then, once we have set out what an evaluation area covers, the toolkit then moves into more detail about the kinds of evidence inspectors will gather. And as you can see on this slide, each evaluation area considers themes and then gives prompts that guide inspectors' evaluation and conversation. Each evaluation area always starts with a theme about strategic leadership of that area. And importantly, when we're thinking about the subject of this evening's webinar, ends with a theme about inclusive practices in that area. These prompts are not a checklist for settings. They are there to help inspectors think about what to explore and discuss in gathering evidence in context and make sure the evaluation is consistent and fair. For example, in curriculum and teaching, inspectors might consider how well the curriculum is sequenced or how practitioners adapt approaches for children with different starting points, including those with special educational needs. In leadership, prompts might focus on how leaders support professional development and ensure the curriculum is well taught. So a key takeaway from this slide is that the toolkit makes inspection more transparent. You can see the themes inspectors will explore through our observations and discussions, and this will help shape evidence gathering. Then we come to the next section in the evaluation area. Each evaluation area in the toolkit is graded on a 5-point scale. This is with the exception of safeguarding, which will be met, not met. What you can see here are the grades we expect to see most often on inspection, and they are needs attention, expected standard, and strong standard. The expected standard in the middle, this is the baseline for inspection. It reflects what is required of settings, and it's the starting point for all inspections. This is why it's at the centre of the page. Now, one clear distinction is that we'll be looking for a secure fit, not a best fit. That is, to meet the expected standard or the strong standard, as a setting, you will need to meet all of the standards in that column. You'll see words such as typically, generally, in the expected standard. And this is to recognise that the expected standard is not about perfection. For example, you may have an area of learning which is being developed well, but does not yet quite meet the same standards as others consistently. So if that was the case, the setting might still be graded as having a secure fit within the expected standard. Now let's think about that needs attention column, because that column includes indicators and not standards. An evaluation area is likely to be graded needs attention when there is not a secure fit for the expected standard. The indicators in the column, so they're those 3 bullet points you can see on the left-hand side of the slide here, are designed to exemplify why a setting might not be meeting the expected standard. And these indicators are deliberately worded positively to acknowledge what leaders are doing, but pointing out where something needs attention as it's not a secure fit within the expected standard. And they're worded in a similar way in each of the evaluation areas. And we've said all along that we expect more settings to have a much varied grade profile. So on the previous slide, we looked at grades that inspectors will use most often. And here we're focusing in on the 2 ends of the scale that we expect to see much less frequently: urgent improvement and exceptional. Now, urgent improvement applies when the expected standards have clearly not been met and where there are serious concerns about the impact of a setting's work in the relevant evaluation area. The indicators explain what this might look like in practice. These are occasions where significant improvement is needed because breaches to the early years foundation stage requirements are having a significant impact on children's safety, well-being, and/or their learning and development. Now, at the other end of the scale is exceptional. This grade is for settings where the evidence shows that standards are not only strong, but they're truly transformational. This means everything in the strong standard is already being met securely and consistently, and leaders are making a sustained difference for children and should share this practice beyond their own setting. Both urgent improvement and exceptional are important parts of the 5-part scale, but they will be much less common in practice. The majority of evaluations will fall into the middle 3 grades that we looked at on the previous slide. So what's changing for registered early years settings? Here are some important changes for the inspections of early years settings. Inspectors will consider data in understanding the provider's context. This published data is for inspectors to understand the context of the local community, including deprivation data, take-up of EYPP, obesity levels, and oral health data. This data will be available through our Ofsted area data tool that will be published before we go live with inspections in November. We'll make a notification call before 10 a.m. Thinking about currently, we've been making that notification call at lunchtime, which is one of the busiest times for you in your early years setting. We will use an email for sharing and receiving information before the inspection. So an email will be sent to leaders, signposting you to useful information about inspection, as well as asking you to prepare data needed about children and staffing at the setting. Nothing new, but that information we would usually cover in the notification call. We'll also have a planning call with leaders ahead of the inspection. This will help inspectors understand the unique context of your setting, your curriculum overview, and what you as leaders see as your setting's strengths and priorities for improvement. And we're no longer complete a learning walk with leaders, because this is the information we gather as part of that planning call. We'll make shared observations throughout the inspection and have increased and ongoing professional dialogue. As leaders, you'll be able to join and work alongside inspectors throughout the inspection for as much as or as little as you can or want, and where this is appropriate to do so. And if there's any childminders on the webinar this evening, we'll inform childminders of the day that we'll be coming to inspect. Childminders will be inspected within 5 working days of the notification call, and inspectors will agree with you which day is best to inspect, taking into account the children who will be attending. And we're no longer grade out of school providers as met or not met. Instead, for all evaluation areas, except safeguarding, grades will be given. So what happens before the inspector arrives? So as I've said, we will, for group providers, call the setting before 10 a.m. on the working day before inspection. And as for now, childminders and those group settings who do not operate regularly, such as summer play schemes, for example, there will be that 5 working days before the inspection to check which days you're operating and whether there are children on roll or present. You may have heard reference to a nominee, and the nominee is a role that will not be relevant for most inspections, and I think that's really important message to give. It's a distinct role from the nominated individual and does not replace this. And for childminders and smaller group-based settings, there's no need for a nominee. It may be that in larger group-based provisions or for inspections where there might be more than one inspector, leaders might want to nominate someone to be the nominee if this is practical to do so, because their involvement can help the inspection to run smoothly and remain focused and purposeful. But this person will need to have a thorough knowledge of how the setting operates on a day-to-day basis. And during the notification call, inspectors will talk you through this and ask if there is or the need to have a nominee. Inspectors will call you for the planning call at the time that was agreed in the notification call. And this call will not be a call that's recorded, but you will be welcome to take notes. And the aim of this call, the planning call, will be to introduce ourselves and discuss practicalities. It will also help us to understand your context and plan the timetable. And as we've already said, you will have discussed with the inspector what you want all children to know and achieve at your setting, so there will no longer be that need for a learning walk when we arrive. It is important to say, though, that we may still inspect without notice when our risk assessment deems it appropriate. And this is explained in more detail in our operating guide and supporting additional guidance. We will inspect without notice when we inspect without notice, anything that we would have covered during the planning call will of course be discussed with you on arrival. So let's now think about what we will actually do when we get on inspection. On inspection, inspectors will gather evidence to enable them to celebrate the strengths in children's achievement, belonging, and their ability to thrive. We'll validate leaders' priorities and progress, and we will highlight priorities for improvement. So all inspections will begin with a brief introduction with leaders and staff and children. And our inspections will be grounded in professional dialogue through observation and discussion with the person who knows the setting and children the best. Inspectors will consider what leaders are aiming to achieve, how well they are doing it, and how well they know that it's working. So throughout the inspection, we will give particular attention to the experience and outcomes of all children, particularly children who face those barriers to their learning and/or their well-being. Most evidence will be gathered through shared observations with leaders and ongoing discussions with leaders and practitioners. We want to speak with the practitioners designated to take the lead responsibility for safeguarding and, of course, talk to the SENCO where that's appropriate. And as part of shared observations, inspectors will track the experiences of a case sample of children relative to the size of the setting. Now, importantly, the focus will be on the outcomes and experiences of children and these are children, a representative sample of children of different ages, including babies, particularly those who are disadvantaged, those who with SEND, and those known or previously known to children's social care, and those who face other barriers to their learning and/or well-being. I'm sure many of you have heard our Chief Inspector say, if we get it right for those who are most vulnerable, then we get it right for all children. So we want to observe children at play and in their daily routines. We want to observe those important interactions between adults and children. And inspectors will take regular reflections on their own before joining leaders for collaborative, reflective discussions about what they have seen and heard in those shared observations. And inspectors will agree with you who might attend these discussions. And as part of these, inspectors will encourage leaders to reflect on shared observations and whether they've observed what, as a setting, is typically like. They will discuss whether any inspection activity needs to be adapted in light of emerging evidence. And these discussions are a really important opportunity to review the evidence in relation to the toolkit and the evaluation areas covered so far. And when we inspect a range of different size and types of early years settings, we inspect a way that works for those different specific contexts. We make practical adjustments as we go along to ensure that our inspection methodology is applied proportionately to your particular context. So for childminders, for example, we already spend time reflecting with childminders as we observe their practice. And as I said earlier, in out-of-school settings, we'll think about the evaluation areas that are relevant to them. So let's think about the report cards. What happens after the inspection? This slide shows an example of what the report card looks like, and we are bringing together the most popular preferences of parents and professionals by combining separate grades, rating scales, and short summaries into new report cards. The narrative gives a detailed picture of performance, while that 5-point scale offers the clarity and simplicity that parents have asked us for. So at the end of the inspection, the inspector will write a report card which will reflect the evidence that they've gathered. It will be clear, concise and focused on what matters most, as informed by your settings context, your evaluation of your setting and the toolkit. It will explain the grade given for each evaluation area and make clear what the setting should do to improve. And of course, it will be consistent with the verbal feedback given to you at the end of the inspection. Now, after the inspection, which we can see on this slide, and I'm not going to spend too long on this slide, as our post-inspection arrangements regarding report publication are the same as they were under the original education inspection framework. So you will be sent the report card after moderation, quality assurance and consistency checking. And you can share your inspection findings with whoever you consider appropriate. However, the information should not be made public or shared with parents until you receive the final report card. And then there are timescales for you to be able to comment on the draft report or submit a complaint. And here is the timeline for change. Our response to the consultation was published back in September, and you can find the details on gov.uk. And we've been hosting several engagement events in our regions. We've been hosting webinars and, of course, attending events like this one. All our early years inspectors have, or are just about to, finished completing comprehensive training to support the transition to the renewed framework before being deployed to those live inspections next month. And for openness and transparency, the full inspector training materials will continue to be published online, and that will happen as soon as everyone's completed their face-to-face training. So you'll be able to access that information that we've shared with our inspectors. We're also undertaking a number of pilot inspections to volunteer settings. So if you've been part of that, I'd just like to say thank you. And this is vital experience of the full end-to-end inspections before November, an opportunity for you to see what it might look like, but also for our inspectors to have a practice. We'll resume inspections under the revised framework in November as planned. And importantly, though, of course, during this period, we will maintain any urgent inspection and regulatory activity. Now, finally, before we move to questions, on this next slide, you can see a QR code that will take you to a link to the resources that I've mentioned this evening, so that you can find out more about the changes and what they mean for you. So I think it's time for questions, Seb.
It is, yeah. Sorry, I'm still experiencing a little bit of a lag as I move through slides and unmute myself. So apologies. Thank you very much. That was really thorough, really informative, really helpful. I'm sure plenty of information has been taken away by our attendees there. Thank you. It was really insightful. And I've noticed that there's been quite a few questions that have dropped in for you, Wendy. So Shushila's asked, is the early years inspection the same for early years in schools, or is this different for settings? So I think the question is the framework different per setting, is different criteria, etc.
So that's a really, really interesting question, and one that we get asked a lot. And so let's think about that. So this is the renewed education inspection framework is across all our education remits. So it is there for our further education and skills, those colleagues who inspect in colleges and providers for apprenticeships, for example. Then it also covers our schools and it also covers early years. However, there are nuances to those inspections. There are also things where we are required by legislation to do different things in different places. So there are toolkits per inspection remit. So I think the important thing to say from a school's perspective, there still is an evaluation area on early years within schools, within the schools toolkit. So if you are working in early years within the school space, that's where you need to have a look. And remembering that early years in schools applies to the whole school, but early years is one part of the whole school. Whereas in early years, registered early years settings, early years is the whole setting. It's all the children that are in that setting. But importantly, there is read across for the two places. So if we think about EYFS applies in both those places, it's just in schools with the inspectorate, we're not the regulator, but we are the regulator in registered early years. So that there are some nuances there, but essentially best start in life research review, the early years foundation stage, it applies whether you are providing early years in the school space or you're providing early years as a registered early years provider, and there's read across there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wendy. A few more questions. We've got a few more minutes to address some of these questions. One from Kirsty, who is asking, will Ofsted be involved in the national ordinarily available framework that's being talked about? And will they reflect on transition and what should be ordinarily available to both PVIs, preschools and maintained nurseries?
I think that's one that I'd need to come back on because I'm not completely clear on what the question is being asked, if I'm honest, Seb.
Yeah, okay. We will include that in the collection of questions post-event. We've got one from Karen. For childminders, can the planning call happen after 6 p.m. so this doesn't impact on care and attention of children in the setting during the day?
Interesting, Karen, because that's something that's come up in our inspector training today. One of the things that we're saying is that planning call, we're not suggesting that our inspectors work out of hours, but actually one of the things in terms of that planning call, you and the inspector will agree the most suitable time for that, and that might be when children are having a nap or a quieter time. We don't expect the planning call to last longer than 30 minutes. So it's about having that conversation and working collaboratively with the inspector about when the best time for that call is.
Great, thank you. And finally, a question from Tessa. Is the toolkit for each kind of early years provider and tailored with areas for each setting? For example, schools and childminders having different evaluation areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, and we got that from the feedback that we had. So we did a lot of work with organisations such as your member organisations such as Childminding UK, Coram Pacey from a provider, from a childminder perspective, and also work with Pacey, Early Years Alliance, and a National Day Nursery Association, just to make sure that those toolkits are nuanced and they include the context and how we might apply the toolkit differently in those different settings. And that's a really important thing. And I think we've had some feedback that is really helpful in terms of that journey that we've been on, that they are now much clearer about how that works in different provider types and in different contexts.
Great. Thank you, Wendy, and thank you to all who posted questions into the chat there. Really appreciate your engagement, some fantastic questions, and to repeat, any questions unanswered, we will endeavour to answer them, and we'll publish them onto the Foundation Years website as soon as we possibly can, and we'll notify everyone on the call when that is done as well. So thank you to everyone who submitted questions, and thank you to all of our speakers for answering them so thoroughly and so thoughtfully. It's really appreciated.